Sooner than I was anticipating, I gathered together. How do I keep getting off to one side? Anyway, sooner than I was anticipating, I gathered together a bunch of books that I wanted to unload and take to a local used bookstore. Starting to maybe sour a little bit on that used bookstore, but let's not get into that right now. Organization people work on it. Anyway, this used bookstore has in the past done me very well when it comes to finding a lot of interesting tabletop RPG material. Well, this time it did not. They have a fairly, I don't want to say it's that big, but it's not a bad size section of tabletop RPG stuff. And the darn thing was like maybe a third full. A lot of it was miniature games. It was brutal. I mean, it looked like they had been just absolutely devastated. I mean, good for them that they have unloaded a bunch of stuff, but it was bad. So what did I get? Not much, I'll tell you. I found this. This is a Tunnels and Trolls solitaire adventure called Red Circle by Michael Stackpole. Now, I have read a few Michael Stackpole novels, which I really enjoyed, and I always forget that he actually did a bunch of game design back in the day. I really just knew him as a novelist. So I don't have any Tunnels and Trolls material, and I believe it's currently out of print, as I believe, again, that I think the original author who also ran the company or the rights company or whatever, I believe that person has passed, and I think that the rights are sort of up in the air right now. There's some kind of discussion about trying to do a new edition, but I don't think everybody knows exactly who owns it or something. I don't know. There's confusion, and as far as I know, it is not currently in print. So I don't have Tunnels and Trolls. Why would I get Tunnels and Trolls? Mostly because apparently this was a game that early on really embraced solo adventures, and I am trying to kind of branch myself out into a little bit more on the solo adventure front. Actually sitting in front of me is the third sorcery book, which is now part of the Fighting Fantasy series. I don't think it originally really was intended to be. Anyway, I started working on this before taking a trip. I have not gotten back to finishing it. I have mixed feelings about these, but what have you. Anyway, in my branching out into solo adventures, I've been thinking about trying out some Tunnels and Trolls, and this one was there, and it was not that cheap, but it wasn't that expensive. Anyway, so I picked it up. And again, the RPG section was really sparse, so I didn't have a lot to grab. The only other thing I found that I was even moderately, I can speak, I barely even dipped into my gin. Not sure if I'll speak better after or before. Whatever the case, this is Space 1889's Soldier's Companion. I already had this. I don't want to say I'm kicking myself because this wasn't super expensive, and I do like Space 1889, and maybe if I ever got a game going, there would be material in this I could hand to another player. I don't know. I haven't actually read this, and it actually looks like it's a lot of maybe leaning toward the miniatures combat aspect. Space 1889 is a weird beast. It's like half a role-playing game and half a miniatures combat game got smashed together and then thrown into a blender because the organization feels a bit haphazard. Great setting, tons of potential for cool gaming. I wanted to get this to the table for 35 plus years, I think, if I'm doing math right. Anyway, whatever the case, it's not a very good game. In my opinion, not a very good game. So I would probably run it with basic role playing. That's my thought, is basic role playing. Anyway, I already had this, so I really didn't need it, and that was it. There was such a small amount of stuff. Again, a lot of it was miniature combat stuff. Even their Games Workshop section, the Warhammer section, was pretty sparse. And it was so bad I almost picked up a couple of Warhammer lore books that it's contemporary lore, which I'm much less interested in, but they only had like volume 2 of a couple of series. So I'm like, oh, forget it. Anyway, so in desperation, we looked around. That's where I ran into some problems with the place, and it's completely haphazard and terrible organization, which, as somebody who has worked in bookstores for a big chunk of my life, I absolutely hated how disorganized and poorly organized, because that's the thing, it was both. It was poorly organized as a baseline, and then disorganized after the fact. That drives me nuts. Like, they had history sections nowhere near each other, spread throughout the store. It was ridiculous. Anyway, we found a few things. My wife got a couple of gifts for friends that we were seeing this past weekend or week. I don't know what day it is. We also grabbed a couple of travel guides. Paris, where we're heading soon. London, where we're probably also heading soon. It'll be my second time in Paris, my first time in London. And these were relatively up to date. These are not that old, which I think we may have had a guide for Paris before that I think may have been a little older. Anyway, the maps will be handy if nothing else. So, Paris and London. My wife also found some DVDs. I'm a little wary of DVDs from a used bookstore, but also I needed to fill out my credit. And here we are. So, funny thing happened on the way to the forum. Pretty sure we didn't have that. This one here, which we also, I don't believe, had, and apparently is difficult to find right now. And then some old film noir, a couple of double packs, Active Violence, which I'm pretty sure I've seen. And is this Mystery Street? Yeah, Mystery Street. Don't think I've seen that. It's Ricardo Montalban. Elsa Lancaster's in it. Just saw Elsa Lancaster in Mary Poppins. Marshall Thompson. Well, a lot of people kind of crap on Marshall Thompson for being boring, and I'm not going to argue that he isn't, but I kind of like him. Active Violence, Van Heflin, Robert Ryan, cool. Janet Leigh, which I'm assuming is an early one from her. Mary Astor, so cool. And then They Live by Night. I know I've seen this one. It's been a while. And Side Street, not sure. And I think these both have Farley Granger. They do. They both have Farley Granger. We've also got Howard Da Silva in this one. And let's see, anybody else interesting in here? Not really. So, some film noir to check out. Then, I've been a sci-fi buff for a really long time, but I've never read Octavia Butler. There's a fairly easy and simple explanation for why I haven't read Octavia Butler, which is she comes from a generation of sci-fi writers I don't particularly get into typically. I'm not a fan of Harlan Ellison. And let me rephrase that. I think Harlan Ellison was a raging jackass. And he ticked me off almost every time he opened his dang mouth. I think he was, it seems from every indication, he's awful to work with, awful to be around. He just seems like a terrible person, like as a human. But he's also part of a sort of a movement that's sort of new wave science fiction. A lot of the 60s, post-60s, the drugs, the, whatever, the post-hippie thing, I just didn't click with it. I'm not a big fan. And again, I haven't read extensively, so I'm sure there's good stuff in there, but I'm not a huge fan of Philip K. Dick, not a big fan of Harlan Ellison. I'm blanking, I'm thinking like Brian Aldiss. I'm trying to think of some of the other people from that era. It's just not my cup of tea. But I figure I should read some Butler at least and give her a chance. I have not read, as far as I know, anything. And I think that includes short stories. Because again, I don't seek out stuff from that era of sci-fi, typically speaking. I think I really didn't pick up sci-fi again until the late 70s, early 80s. Like there's a gap of stuff for where I haven't read a lot of. Anyway, so I picked up Kindred. I did start reading this, but I'm not sure if I'm actually going to focus on reading this right now because I tend to read while commuting. I don't have a lot of commuting going on coming up, but I was at the beach and I figured I'd start reading it. It's, interesting so far. I think it might be hurt by the fact that I already kind of know the premise, which I think if I didn't know the premise, I would probably go into it ready for my mind to get a little bit blown, but I'm not there. Anyway, I'm going to check this out at some point coming up. Well, let's see. Speaking of sci-fi authors and authors that I did read a lot of, I found this, The Book of Andre Norton. I have read a lot of her stories, a lot of them, books, novels, and stuff. What I haven't read is short stories. And I didn't honestly know that she'd really done much in the way of short stories, but here is an anthology of short stories. So cool. Here's, see if you can read the contents. I like Norton. I'm not going to argue that she is like a fantastic writer. There's a sameness to some of her, a big chunk of her novels, which I find comforting and enjoyable. I think she's she's good at making a story very readable. So she is a good writer. Her plotting, her character development, at least in the books I've read, is pretty much non-existent. But also, that was not super uncommon for writers of her era. But her writing is good. It's enjoyable. It's a fun read. So I'll be curious to see what her short stories are like. Sci-fi can sometimes be really amazing in short story format. So we'll find out. As a kid, one of my favorite writers, and as a kid, you can determine your favorite writer based on very few data points. One of my favorite writers was Robert Silverberg. Why, you might ask? Well, I read one of the first adult, turns out it's actually kind of more meant as a teen or young adult, before that was a separate sort of genre. One of the first adult novels I read, a non-picture book, which was over like 100 pages, was Time of the Great Freeze by Robert Silverberg. And I loved it. It helped to give me some confidence. It helped to open me up to reading on my own and not having people read to me. I've mentioned in a previous video that the Dragonlance books were core for me, and then very disappointing when I went back and read them, and the first one anyway was absolutely awful. But it was core to me because it gave me confidence to read bigger books, to read real, like thick, what I thought adult books were. That those books gave me confidence, but I wouldn't have gotten to those without Robert Silverberg's Time of the Great Freeze. That was the book that really kind of, it was the catalyst event. There was the time before and the time after with that book. So I had this credit, and what I had gone there for, RPG stuff, I didn't have any luck. So I went all in on Silverberg. They didn't have the one book, of course, I was looking for, which was Lord Valentine's Castle. I was thinking about grabbing that and then getting some of the follow-up books in the series. They didn't have it, so I didn't. But what I did get, Up the Line. Now, another problem I have with this particular bookstore, they have a tendency to slap price tags over things, and the price tags do not come off easy. That's annoying. And the price tags are quite sizable, so I can't really read the back. So look it up on Google or whatever search engine still works. But it isn't just AI nonsense. Master of Life and Death. This one I can read. Roy Walton was the most ruthless man on an overpopulated Earth and its only hope. Director of Popeek, the Bureau of Population Equalization, Walton's order could dispossess a Bolivian rancher, relocate 1 million New Yorkers to the Arctic, or send a ward full of babies to death. So there's more to the back. I'm not going to read the rest of it, but we'll find out. Master of Life and Death, the classic novel, it says. Downward to Earth. I can't really read the back of this. Oh, and it's just a quote from the book. That's not ever really helpful because it doesn't give you any real indication. Silverberg's terrifying sci-fi adventure of the last Earth beings on Belzagor. So, not sure what that's about. We'll find out. The Face of the Waters. This is the latest, I think, of the books here that I've read from. Now, I have read some later of his books. They might not be as late as this, but I read, I think it's A New Springtime. I can never remember which one the first one in that series is. I read that, though, and then there's a short story set in the same world, which I've read, but I have yet to finish the series. I haven't read the second book. I think it's actually chronologically the first book, the second book, and then the short story, but I didn't know that, and I just read the short story, so that kind of, anyway. What was it? New Springtime and At Winter's End, I think maybe At Winter's End is actually the first book. Anyway, I haven't read this. This is a bigger book. I know he was the fashion of the day. Books were getting longer. Some of his latter day books are definitely longer than the early stuff. There's no page numbers. I wonder if this is some kind of preview in the back or something. Yeah, it's some kind of preview of some kind. The following. Okay, it's a thing on the Kingdoms of the Wall, which I don't know, and that's coming out in February 1993. So anyway, this is a 436-page book. We'll see when I get around to reading that. I kind of want to reread Time of the Great Freeze. I think I still have like my old really ratty beat up copy. I was so tempted actually to get a less beat up copy, but I didn't. Let's see, The Second Trip. This was a hardcover, but it was also $3, so I figured why not. This one, The Conglomeroid Cocktail Party. I think, was this short stories? I think this might have been short stories. Yeah, I think this is... maybe it's not. Well, I really don't know. Maybe this is a novel. I'm not sure. We'll find out. And then Majapur Chronicles. I didn't realize at the time when I snagged this, and then I found out a little later that this is actually, I think, one of the Lord Valentine's Castle follow-ups. So it'll probably be a little while before I get to it. But again, these hardcovers were cheaper than some of the soft covers. So I figured, what the hey? I do like a nice hardcover, and I figure I'll get some from somebody who was, when I was a young person, my favorite writer, having read almost none of their work. I've also been hearing, is it Moid from Media Death Cult has, I think it was him, has read a batch of Silverberg over the last couple of years, if I'm remembering my videos correctly, and had a lot of praise, and it got Silverberg on my brain again. So I also think, as of the time of recording, because he's an older gentleman, but I'm pretty sure Silverberg is still with us as I'm recording this, which is not true of most of his contemporaries. And because I still wasn't quite there to fill out the credit, I grabbed this Robert Louis Stevenson leather-bound edition. It's a very nice-looking volume. I want to say it might have... no, I thought maybe it had some illustrations. It really does not. It does have nice end papers. This has in it Treasure Island, Prince Otto, The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, Kidnapped, The Black Arrow, The Master of Ballantrae, and David Balfour. And so multiple novels. I feel terrible. I don't think I've ever read Robert Louis Stevenson, and it seems like the kind of thing that as a young man I would have enjoyed quite a bit. I'm going to try to read this at some point coming up, and I have a lot of friends with kids who are too young for a lot of this stuff right now, but they will get older. And I think I'd like to be able to have some of these books to hand off to some of them as they grow up, assuming that they meet my approval Like, for example, I read that leather-bound collection of multiple Bram Stoker novels, and I unloaded that as garbage. I unloaded that pretty quickly because you can kinda, if you squint, ignore the anti-Semitism of Dracula, but you could not ignore the raging racism of the other novels in there, and they were also terribly written, because that's the thing I really found, is that Bram Stoker, while he has moments, is generally a crap writer. There, I said it. So I'm still going to try to read some of these classics. I have like Phantom of the Opera, which I haven't read. I'm going to try my hardest to read some of these classics. And if they're cool, they're ones that I think are good, if I like them and they don't seem too deeply problematic, I want to be able to hand these off to some of these people as they grow up so they can fall in love with some older works along with newer stuff. I don't think we should be consumed by the canon. I don't think we should be judged on which classic novels we've read, because frankly, some of the classics are not very good. But the good ones, the cool ones, the enjoyable ones, the ones that are fun to read, maybe teach you some cool lessons, all of that kind of good stuff, they're worth checking out. And if this is one of those, then I want to be able to pass that off to one of my friend's kids at some point, so that maybe it helps them foster a lifetime of reading. I think that's pretty grand. Anyway, that was my disappointing, or at least unexpected, haul from the used bookstore. I didn't get quite as much that I wanted, but also I think I maybe found some gems. So we'll see as time goes on and I get a chance to read some of this stuff. That's it for this video, and I think I only have like one more to record. How exciting! Until next time, and I don't know how long it's going to be before I'm able to build up enough of these to go sell off at the used bookstore again, but I think I might just try to find a different used bookstore to go to, because I gotta tell you, that was a real disappointing run. And considering it's like a 40-minute drive to get there, all right, till next time, take care.